Lizzie Halliday, the serial killer who was considered the worst woman in history. Lizzie Halliday, a serial killer who terrorized the United States in the late 19th century, became the first woman to be sentenced to death by electrocution. On June 21, 1894, the world was introduced to the first case of a woman condemned to die in the electric chair. Halliday, who was responsible for the deaths of at least 5 people, though suspected of many more, left a trail of violence that horrified the nation. After her death, the New York Times described her as the worst woman in the world. Born Eliza Margaret McNally in 1859 in Ireland, she moved with her family to the United States as a child. At the age of 20, she married for the first time. Her husband, Charles Hopkins, died under mysterious circumstances just 2 years later, and Lizzie fled with another man. A year later, Artemus Brewer, a war veteran, was also found dead. Her third partner, Hiram Parkinson, abandoned her soon after. Lizzie then married George Smith, a former war companion of Brewer. Early in the relationship, Lizzie attempted to poison Smith by putting arsenic in his tea. When her plan failed, the psychopath decided to leave New York. She resurfaced in Vermont, married to Charles Plaisdell, but disappeared 2 weeks later. She was found in Philadelphia, living with the McQuillan family, who had been neighbors of her parents in Ireland. Life seemed calmer for Lizzie under the name Maggie Hopkins, and she opened a small store working there daily. However, she decided to set the store on fire to collect the insurance money. For the arson crime, Lizzie was sentenced to 2 years in the Eastern Penitentiary in Philadelphia. After her release, she sought a new home, this time in Newburgh, Orange County, New York. There, she met widower Paul Halliday, who lived with his children. Initially, Lizzie worked as a housemaid for Paul, but their relationship soon became romantic, and her bizarre habits began to resurface. Lizzie fled with a neighbor, this time stealing some horses. Later, Paul would say that their marriage was marked by spells of insanity from his wife. Lizzie was committed to an asylum but soon convinced her husband to release her. Outside the asylum, the serial killer committed one of her worst acts. She set fire to the barn, killing one of Paul's children, who had a mental illness and was mistreated by Lizzie. After the crime, Paul disappeared, and Lizzie told the neighbors that her husband had gone on a last-minute trip. The crime suspicious of the story, the local residents contacted authorities, who issued a search warrant for the Halliday property. On September 4, 1891, when the police searched the house, they stumbled upon a brutal scene. In the barn, they found the bodies of Margaret and Sarah McQuillan, the women who had sheltered Lizzie in Philadelphia, both shot dead. Beneath the floorboards of the house, the mutilated body of Paul Halliday was discovered. Taken into custody, the serial killer behaved erratically, tearing at her clothes and speaking incomprehensibly. Detectives, however, believed she was merely pretending to be insane. Accused of murder, Lizzie awaited trial in Sullivan County Jail, in Monticello, New York. Her time there was marked by turbulent behavior. During her imprisonment, the criminal refused to eat, set her bed on fire, tried to hang herself multiple times, and even slashed her own throat, claiming she wanted to see if she would bleed. Early life and first murders. Eliza Margaret McNally, who would later be known as Lizzie Halliday, had a troubled childhood even before her murderous tendencies emerged. Her family, like many Irish immigrants at the time, faced hardship and poverty after settling in the United States. Lizzie, seeking an escape from the grim realities of her life, married young. Her first husband, Charles Hopkins, a man she barely knew, became one of her first victims. Charles' death, ruled as a tragic accident at the time, would remain suspicious to those who later learned of Lizzie's true nature. After Hopkins' death, Lizzie quickly remarried, this time to Artemus Brewer, a war veteran. But once again, tragedy struck. Brewer, after only a brief marriage to Lizzie, was found dead in mysterious circumstances as well. Lizzie's quick marriages and the sudden deaths of her husbands raised suspicions about her involvement in their deaths, but no one could prove her guilt. With each marriage and subsequent death, Lizzie's appetite for control and manipulation grew, and she began using poison as her weapon of choice. Her third marriage to Hiram Parkinson was no different. After a few months of marriage, Parkinson abandoned Lizzie, likely sensing the danger she posed. But Lizzie did not give up on her search for a victim. She remarried yet again, this time to George Smith, a man from the same circle of war veterans as her previous husbands. However, things took a dark turn. Lizzie tried to poison Smith, but when the attempt failed, she fled New York, leaving her latest husband in the dust. The fire in Vermont. In Vermont, Lizzie assumed a new identity under the name Maggie Hopkins and settled in a small town. She worked at a local shop, trying to keep a low profile. However, her criminal instincts eventually led her to commit insurance fraud by setting her store on fire. After the fire, Lizzie tried to claim the insurance money, but her actions did not go unnoticed, and she was arrested for arson. She was sentenced to 2 years in the Eastern Penitentiary, where she spent time plotting her next move. Once released, Lizzie moved to Newburgh, where she met Paul Halliday, a widower with several children. At first, Lizzie worked as a domestic servant for Paul, but their relationship quickly became romantic. Halliday, despite some early warnings from those around him, married Lizzie, and soon they became inseparable. However, it wasn't long before Lizzie's mental state deteriorated again. Murder of Paul's child and Paul's disappearance. Once married, Lizzie's pattern of manipulation and violence returned. Lizzie set fire to the barn on Paul's property, and tragically, one of Paul's children who had mental disabilities and was mistreated by Lizzie, was killed in the fire. Afterward, Paul Halliday vanished. Lizzie claimed he had gone on a sudden trip, but the community was suspicious. The neighbors began to question the sudden disappearance of Paul Halliday, and many believed that Lizzie was once again responsible for his death. As more details emerged, the local residents became more concerned, and they began to piece together the pattern of death that followed Lizzie everywhere she went. The authorities soon launched an investigation and discovered the truth behind Paul Halliday's disappearance and the other deaths linked to Lizzie. The search and discovery of the bodies. On September 4, 1891, police obtained a search warrant for the Halliday property. What they found shocked them. In the barn, they discovered the bodies of Margaret and Sarah McQuillan, 2 women who had helped Lizzie in Philadelphia. Both had been shot dead. Under the floorboards of the house, they found the mutilated body of Paul Halliday. The gruesome discovery confirmed what many had long suspected: Lizzie Halliday was not only a murderer, but a serial killer. Lizzie was taken into custody and immediately became the subject of intense scrutiny. Her behavior was erratic, and she often acted out in bizarre ways, tearing at her clothes and speaking in a nonsensical manner. Despite her outward appearance of insanity, investigators were convinced that Lizzie was simply pretending to be mentally ill in an attempt to avoid facing justice. Trial and sensational media coverage. The case of Lizzie Halliday captured the attention of the American public. Newspapers like the New York Times and New York World followed her story, fueling the sensation around her crimes. In an interview with investigative journalist Nellie Bly, Lizzie confessed to killing her first husbands, and even mentioned the name of another man whose body she claimed to have hidden. As the media frenzy grew, more sensational stories emerged. Some publications even speculated that Lizzie might be connected to the notorious Jack the Ripper murders, given the gruesome nature of her crimes. "We suspect this mysterious creature may be related to the horrific murders of Whitechapel," wrote the Daily Times. The idea of a female serial killer, especially one who could be tied to one of the most infamous murderers in history, captivated the public imagination. The sentence and commutation. In June of 1894, Lizzie Halliday was convicted of the murders and sentenced to death by electrocution. She became the first woman to be sentenced to death by the electric chair. However, shortly after the sentencing, her defense team successfully argued that she was insane. A psychiatric evaluation confirmed her unstable mental state, leading to the commutation of her sentence to life imprisonment by New York Governor Roswell P. Flower. Lizzie was sent to the Massachusetts State Hospital for the criminally insane, where she would spend the rest of her life. Despite being in a psychiatric facility, Lizzie's violent tendencies did not subside. In 1906, she stabbed nurse Nellie Wicks over 200 times with a pair of scissors, demonstrating that her murderous impulses were far from gone. The final years and death, Lizzie Halliday spent the remainder of her life in the Massachusetts State Hospital, where she continued to exhibit erratic and violent behavior. Despite being imprisoned for life, she was responsible for the brutal attack on Nellie Wicks, a nurse who had been caring for her. Lizzie's behavior remained unpredictable until her death in 1918, and she left a legacy as one of the most notorious female serial killers in American history. Her story continues to haunt those who study criminal psychology and the history of crime. Lizzie Halliday's life is a chilling reminder of the capacity for violence that can lurk behind even the most seemingly ordinary personas.